Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Glad you could join us this week. We've got a good one in store for you today. And beginning our show, grain marketing has a unique language that depicts specific information. And that language can be confusing to those who are new to farming and those with decades of experience. Market Journal's Bill Dodd caught up with Extension Educator for Agricultural Economics, Jessica Groskopf, to get a better feel for grain marketing lingo.
Trading commodities is a profession that dates back much farther than the trading of stocks and bonds. However, with time comes change. In the modern marketplace, commodities are still exchanged around the world, but one of the most important assets in the toolbox of a fledgling commodity marketer these days is using proper resources and knowing the market lingo.
Yeah, so getting started in grain marketing, it's really important to start to learn the lingo. And the best way to do that is to subscribe to your elevator's local text messages. So they'll text you 2 to 3 times per day with the local prices. And that will also get you used to what the prices are currently doing. I think there's a lot of resources out there related to grain marketing. Nebraska Extension is always available to help you understand more. In fact, we also host workshops on a regular basis. I also encourage you to look at the CME group. They have a great knowledge base that's out there that has educational videos that can help you get started in grain marketing. Another thing that I really encourage folks to do when they're starting out is actually to work with their family and actually take some bushels on. So maybe look at 10 to 15% of your farm's operation if you're able to market that yourself. And that's a really good way to get your feet wet without diving in and taking over completely. So saying, can I take 5 or 10,000 bushels and market them this year? That's a really great way to learn, and each year taking on just a little bit more.
When it comes to making sense of marketing lingo, let's start at the beginning and discuss how to identify commodity codes and contract information when viewing your resources.
So just like other trading platforms like the NASDAQ or the S&P 500 have a code that they use for companies, the CME group has codes for commodities. And basically it allows us to identify what the contract is that is trading based on a few characters, usually 4 or 5 characters. So for each month, there is actually a letter that's associated with that month. So going back to the example of the December contract, it's always noted as a Z. So I actually like to look at commodity codes backwards and start with the numbers. The numbers indicate the year, and then the letter immediately next to those numbers is the month. And so we're looking at that month, and commodities have different months that they trade. Again, corn has 5 contracts. And so if we're looking at March, that letter associated with it will be H. And the month contracts are always consistent.
Available contract expiration months will vary by product. As such, some commodities will naturally be more fluid than others. It's imperative to learn to watch and adapt to how and when those changes will be most advantageous.
Yeah, so corn and wheat have 5 contracts per year. And what we're looking for is the contract that's closest to harvest. We'll call the new crop contract. So for corn, that is the December contract. So we're watching that because when we come and deliver our grain in the fall, that's the contract they're going to be pricing off of. So for a lot of the year, we're actually watching the current contract, and we're watching whatever that new crop contract is, depending on the commodity that we produce and where we're at in the country. So we have to think about the fact that commodities are consumed year round, but only delivered once per year at harvest. So what the commodity months do is allow us to price those commodities at specific intervals throughout the year based on how those commodities are used. So let's flip the script a little bit and say, instead of being a grain producer, I'm a feed yard. So I know I'm going to have to feed those cattle year round. So I want to price that grain for when it's delivered. And so for, again, wheat and corn, there's 5 contracts. And for soybeans, there's actually 7 different contracts. So, from somebody who's actually using that product as an input, that allows me to price that grain throughout the year on a more consistent basis. So it just takes a little bit of getting used to how they manage those contracts. So the more contracts that a commodity has, probably the more liquid that commodity is.
Understanding the lingo is a big step in learning commodity marketing. However, when it comes to marketing, there are always potential missteps new and experienced marketers may take.
Yeah, so marketers often actually don't use the contracts months when they're actually discussing them. So they'll talk about the new crop contract, or they'll talk about today's price, and they're not noting what contract they're actually discussing. So it's really important that you understand how the contracts not only are labeled, but then also how a elevator or a processor will use them. So for example, even though the December corn contract expires on the 14th of the month, or the day before the business day of the 14th of the month, they actually won't quote that for the last basically 2 weeks. So you'll actually stop quoting the December price at the end of November and roll, which is a great phrase, to the next contract. So it takes a lot of time just to kind of understand what contract that they're quoting and how they're utilizing those to set the prices.
As long as you're willing to familiarize yourself with the marketing lingo and are reasonably aware of common pitfalls in marketing, you're well on your way to taking your first steps in becoming a successful grain marketer. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks, Bill. If you're interested in getting started in grain marketing, Jessica has a series of articles detailing practices and information that have been shown to be successful. We've posted links to those articles on the Market Journal website. Now, what do you say we put some of those marketing terms to good use in this week's market segment? Iowa State University Extension economist Chad Hart is my guest this week. There are less than 2 weeks left to make final decisions on 2021 farm revenue insurance programs. While market prices for corn and soybeans are the highest they've been in years, producers still have the option to add extra revenue insurance before March 15th. I asked Chad about that and got his thoughts on price movements in corn and soybeans as well.
Well, the famous date here is, if you're a farmer, the 15th of the month is always a big thing for you. Taxes on April 15th, crop insurance deadline March 15th. And the idea is the crop insurance deadline is big this year, not only because you need to have your insurance signed up for by then, but it's also farm bill decision time. So if you're looking to, for ARC versus PLC, you want to get into that FSA office before March 15th to make sure you've signed up for that program.
Chad, it really is a busy time for producers right now. What's the most exciting thing for you to track this time of year?
Well, I think right now, I would say this year, it has been the price recovery that we've seen over the past 6 months, and watching how that has impacted the farmers that I do get to speak to. The idea is that, throughout, last spring and early summer, talking to farmers, it was, for lack of a better term, a drag. The idea is that they saw their prices were down, COVID was hitting them. It was not a good point to be in within crop agriculture. Since then, we've seen dramatic improvements in prices, and you can see the excitement in the farmers as they want to get out and plant. They are excited about the market opportunities that they see out there. And so that has been exciting to watch over the past few months. And I think as we go forward, it will be interesting because, as you mentioned, the idea is that, the acreage decision this spring is going to be incredibly vital to how the markets continue this run or not.
Yeah, let's talk about that run, because some analysts are saying this grain rally could be losing steam. So I'd like to know, where are you with that? And do you think there's much incentive for prices to rally higher in the short term?
I think there's the opportunity for that to happen, but it's not necessarily the case that there's another leg up here. If you think about what we have seen over the past 6 months, it has been a 50 to 60% increase in prices over a 6-month period. That's an incredible bull run within the market. Now, the reason I say that there's still the potential to go higher is that we have tightened those ending stocks down to levels that typically indicate if we continue to see more demand out there, and especially in this case, international demand, yeah, we could ratchet that tightness down even further and put another leg up on these prices. That said, though, this is also the period of time when we know export sales tend to die off as South America comes online. So it really is this balancing act right now that the market is sort of, I'll call it flip-flopping back and forth on. The idea is we're watching South America to see how quickly that harvest can come in and how many export sales maybe move that direction, because that's going to determine whether we do get that next step up in prices over the next few weeks.
Let's get a question about South America since you touched on it. Brazil's harvest over 25%, safrinha corn planting around 40%. Thoughts on those numbers?
Well, that's the deal. When we look, we know that they are running behind. They have definitely some challenges there. We've been hearing anecdotally tales about, beans coming out of the field wetter than usual, that, they're having some quality issues as they look out there, along with delayed planting as you're looking here. And so all of this is helping stack up, like I say, some of that demand that normally would have shifted from the US down to South America. Nope, it's staying up here for a little longer because of those production and quality issues that are occurring in South America right now.
And as we look down the line, big USDA report coming out at the end of the month. And I've been asking analysts the last couple of weeks to give us a preview of what we may see in that report. Would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, that's the deal. What USDA laid out for us was 92 million acres on the corn side, about 90 on the beans. And probably the biggest thing I'm watching for now is, okay, that's what USDA was thinking. We've had that issue of, the real cold snap, especially hitting the southern plains. And what I'm watching here is winter wheat kill. How many acres open up additionally now that we've had that cold snap that could move into corn and soybean production? That to me is still an open question. I think that's what makes the end of the month very exciting here, in that we could have a few more acres in play than we've originally thought here.
And finally, Chad, with planting getting underway very, very soon, it's a good time to be thinking about your marketing for the year ahead. What advice do you have for us?
Oh yeah, no, when I'm looking right now, I like to tell folks now's the perfect time to think about marketing, because you're not out in the field yet. You're not planting. One of the biggest issues I think with crop marketing is, when do we tend to see our best prices? Well, when we're at our busiest, when we're out there in the fields working to get the crop planted and underway. So the more marketing planning we can do today, the more likely we're able to take advantage of those opportunities that likely come in a month or two. That's why, you often hear a lot of us ag economists talking about having a marketing plan and being prepared for the year upcoming. That way, you don't have to spend a lot of time necessarily thinking about your marketing. You've already thought about it. You've got that plan. You just need to put that plan in place when you get to that point in time.
Next week, we'll be joined by DTN's Todd Holtman. Next up, in late December, the Nebraska Healthy Soils Task Force filed a 46-page report entitled Soil Health for Nebraska Wealth with Governor Pete Ricketts and the Nebraska Legislature Agriculture Committee. The report proposes 5 goals that focus on voluntary grassroots initiatives to put Nebraska in a position as a national leader in soil health. Proponents of these initiatives point out the proposals focus on incentivizing and encouraging farmer-led conservation efforts rather than mandates and regulations. You can read all the details in the cover story of the March issue of Nebraska Farmer. Moving on, and last month's winter storm won't be one we'll forget for as long as we live, that's for sure. Nebraska wasn't the only spot that had to deal with the cold and the snow. Arctic air dropped as far south as Mexico, and destructive power outages were widespread across Texas. I spoke with DTN Senior Ag Meteorologist Bryce Anderson about this storm's place in weather history and what he's watching heading into spring.
This outbreak is truly one for the books. And then the fact that, that it got below zero over such a large portion of the interior of the country is very significant also. We had almost below zero temperatures cover an area that extended practically to South Texas. I've seen a few cold waves or two in my time. This for me is the harshest in more than 30 years.
Bryce, we'll often hear the term polar vortex when talking about a particularly cold weather event. Is that what happened here?
Well, there was a piece of the polar vortex that broke away from the high latitudes and worked all the way south here into the central United States. The polar vortex is usually just a very consistent whirlwind of upper atmosphere winds that spin around the high latitudes north of the Arctic Circle and keep the bitter cold air up to the north. But in this case, the winds actually weakened to the point that there was a portion of that standing circulation that sort of lost its character, lost its identity, then was able to work farther south. That's what allowed that large portion of this really cold air to kind of break away and move south here into the central U.S.
So Bryce, all that being said, what's ahead for us? What are you watching, and what are your concerns as we get closer to planting season?
Well, a macro scale feature that I'm watching, Troy, is that La Nina still is not over with in terms of its impact on our spring conditions. And the downside of La Nina still being an overall part of this weather scenario is that here in the Western Corn Belt, springtime precipitation does not look like it's going to be all that generous for us. And we know that there still is a lot of dryness that has to be dealt with and managed and coped with during this coming spring. So I'm concerned about a dry start to the spring season. Along with that, I think we're going to see a real ping pong back and forth temperature pattern, with March likely to be above normal and quite a bit above normal in some parts of the northern plains and in the western Midwest. But then we get into April and the pattern turns a little bit more to a cooler note. The one thing that I would say is that if it turns a little bit cooler during April, that might delay the onset of the vegetative growth in pastures and kind of weedy areas and so forth. And that actually would help delay their uptake of the available soil moisture, because we're going to need about every drop that we can get the way this particular year is shaping up.
With that expected lack of precipitation that you mentioned, how could that impact producer decisions for the season?
One thing that comes to mind for me right away is that I think irrigation is going to be used for a longer term this year than we're used to. In fact, we could even see some need to run the pivots in order just to get soil moisture into the profile to germinate seeds during spring planting. And so I think that's going to be one thing. That also obviously increases the cost of production for this year. And so that's going to be a feature there. Another notable crop decision that we may see is more grain sorghum being planted. There's a good market for grain sorghum, and growers know that, but just because of the grain sorghum ability to get by on less moisture, that might be another factor that leads to more grain sorghum acreage in the Great Plains this year than we have maybe seen in the past few years.
Thanks to Bryce for that insight. The condition of this year's winter wheat crop is another thing we're tracking since the cold weather. Nebraska producers were already dealing with drought. Add in the historically low temperatures, and according to USDA, only 30% of this year's winter wheat crop is rated good to excellent. Executive Director of the Nebraska Wheat Board, Royce Schaneman, spoke with Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh on the issues producers are facing this growing season.
With harvest just around the corner, all eyes are on winter wheat and how this year's harsh cold and heavy snowfall could be problematic for the crop.
We think those temperatures and conditions are going to have an effect. We probably won't know the full effect of those till we get into the growing season a little bit more. But we do know that, going into winter, it varied across the state, but in general, we had some spotty stands, stands that weren't very well established going into winter. For the most part, in a lot of regions of the state, it's been a fairly open winter. And then we did get just enough snow cover across the state to protect somewhat against those extremely cold temperatures. But in some of the areas, we didn't have as much snow cover as we probably would have liked.
Due to the drought conditions in 2020, Royce says the moisture from the melting snow will be a welcome sight for many wheat growers. However, producers across the region will most likely still see an impact on the markets due to weather.
Well, there is going to be an impact because really through the majority of the hard red winter wheat growing region, we had these extreme temperatures. We had the crop in different stages of growth and production, especially when you get into Texas and Oklahoma. That wheat was, breaking dormancy and starting to grow. So they're going to see some effects there. And as you know, it's such a global marketplace anymore. These weather events or, trade issues, marketing issues, it really has a domino effect all around the world.
While the weather is warming up, Royce says we're not out of the woods yet. His advice? Remain patient and let the wheat grow.
I know a lot of people say wheat has 9 lives and we're going through a lot of them right away early. So, I think it is tough right now. Spring will really tell us what the crop, is going to look like. The thing that worries me in Nebraska is a lot of times if that wheat crop doesn't look good coming out of dormancy, it's pretty easy for guys to tear it up and try another crop. So that probably doesn't sound favorable right now, but it is tough. We're in drought conditions, those poor stands. So, kind of stick with that wheat crop as long as you can. Certainly you've got to make decisions that favor your production system and your goals of your operation. But really, getting a wheat crop and getting wheat into a rotation is helpful to a lot of other crops and breaks up disease and pest cycles. So try and hang in there as long as you can.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
Thanks, Maddie. We'll check back in on winter wheat after harvest a little bit later on. We're going to end things today with current weather conditions and Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist Al Dutcher. Al, it's been another nice week. Seems like the coldest weather is behind us for the season. So what do you say we celebrate with a good forecast? What have you got for us today?
Well, Troy, I wouldn't go that far as to say that the worst is behind us. Been in Nebraska long enough to know that March can be a real cruel month. You think it's going to be warm when it starts out and turns bad at the end, and vice versa. So we're not done through the woods yet, and we've had a nice week, and we're probably going to have a few more of those days ahead of us before we start to see a change in the pattern into the western United States, which means that increases the chances that we'll start to see some downstream action in the central and northern plains as we progress into the middle of the month. But enjoy the weather. You can't gripe about it whatsoever. It's been beautiful. We've seen a few 70s this week, and it looks like we're going to see another chance for a few of those next week. So overall, nothing to complain of, especially as we get into calving season. And of course, the nicer the weather, the worse or the less the problems we have. So let's get to the upper air models and see what we have in store for us as we go through this period. And the first thing I'll draw your attention to is, of course, these warm conditions that have been invading the southern plains. We've got a trough to the east of us, bringing a little cooler air in for today, but overall, it gets warmer from this point forward. We have low pressure at the surface up in the eastern Montana and some lows situated down the southwest. Precipitation with the upper air trough trying to come into the Pacific Northwest, but you can see pretty much free and clear of any precipitation today. And as we get into tomorrow, that ridge plains sits right over top of the southern plains, flow coming from the southwest over top of that ridge, have a low pressure in the Texas Panhandle. There's no moisture for it to work with. You can see, once again, high and dry across the central United States. But as we get into Monday, now that trough starts to dig into the western United States, and we start to see some energy coming in from the southwest. It's going to shoot up in through the central Rockies. Start to see a couple pieces of energy moving through the central Rockies. But most of the energy is back off the western United States, so we're not expecting any precipitation to break out on Monday. But as we get into Tuesday, things start to change a little bit. As this trough separates from the northern flow, we start to see some energy ejecting out of this system, potentially seeing a low develop in northwestern portions of Kansas. That's going to start to lift moisture well up into the northern Rockies, and we should see some potent precipitation break out into this region. And as the trough from the northern stream starts to dig a little south, it starts to merge with this trough, and that low pressure in southwest Kansas is going to lift a lot of moisture up and interact with the northern stream. We see a fairly decent weather maker up into the northern upper Mississippi River Valley into the Great Lakes. And by Thursday, that system passes and we turn our attention to the trough in the west. It starts digging down. That's the weather maker that we're probably going to pay attention to for Nebraska. By the time we get into Thursday, low pressure sets up in northern portions of Wyoming. We start to see a pretty good snow shield breaking out because of the Pacific Northwest. Thunderstorms across the Ohio River Valley. And by Friday, this trough starts to dig into the Great Basin. It's usually a setup for a fairly decent snowstorm somewhere within the central to northern plains region. We'll have to pay attention to that. But certainly we're starting to show moisture with that system ejecting out and thunderstorm development over Oklahoma and potentially some development of precipitation along the Front Range. So looks like a fairly nice pattern as we go through this week, but it gets a little trickier and dicier as we get to the end of next week. 8 to 14-day forecast takes into account for that colder air coming in. We can see a well-established strong trend for below normal temperatures across the west. And in terms of precipitation, with those systems coming to the west and ejecting out, it does look from next Thursday to the following Tuesday that we have a decent shot for above normal moisture statewide. So overall, Troy, it looks like fairly nice conditions, and then things start to break down as we get to the end of next week, and that's when things turn really, really potentially ugly.
Thanks, Al. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. And don't forget, you can get the latest updates on the coronavirus outbreak at covid19.unl.edu. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.